Scott Holiday here, and welcome back to Plus 2 Wrestling. A little bit of business up front here. You might have noticed I missed last week's upload because I was working really hard on a big video I was really excited to debut on the channel. And as I was putting on my finishing touches this week, I found out that that video can't be uploaded. I'm not going to go into the details because it's a big mess, and speculation, I think, is good for the algorithm. So, unfortunately, the takeaway here is the video I had planned cannot go up. But a video needed to come out because I really have a lot of important plugs in the plug-in. So, what I decided to do is this is a re-upload of my Endings in Wrestling video. Now, before you go anywhere, just know that this is a new and improved version of it. It's got extra content, plus the version that went out, a lot of it had to be cut out via YouTube because it was getting blocked, and it is missing a lot of important chunks. So that's been corrected now, so this should be the original vision for that video. Hopefully that doesn't happen again, but this is a new improved version, so even if you've seen the old version, please stick around because this is one of my favorite videos I ever put out, and it's finally coming out in the version that I wanted to do. So now, let's plug in. You want to join us for the biggest independent wrestling show in Maryland history in Baltimore, Maryland. It is Don't Blink. CZW, for the first time ever, rocks the power plant live. There you will see the Rep in tag team action against Post Game. Plus, remember that contract signing I mentioned? Well, it's going down at Don't Blink as Milk Chocolate defends the tag team championships against the Slime Balls in a TLC match. You definitely do not want to miss this one. March 9th, the doors open at 6 p.m. The bell rings at 7. We'll see you in Baltimore, Maryland. Get your tickets now at czwrestling.com. March 23rd at 12:30 p.m. at 827 Jersey Avenue in Gloucester City, New Jersey. It is a fundraiser to support Extra Life, and it is Cosplay Pro Wrestling. Your favorite from the world of anime, comic books, and video games clash in the squared circle. So be sure to join us for Cosplay Pro Wrestling, where you will see Deathstroke taking on Deadpool. It is a clash of DC and Marvel comics. You don't want to miss this. It's just a $10 donation at the door. So we know that WrestleMania is going to be on Saturday and Sunday, but what are you going to do the Wednesday and Thursday of WrestleMania week? Well, I recommend that you come check out some Labor of Love and Sean Henderson as they present WrestleJohn on Wednesday, April 3rd. Join us at Attic Brewing Company, that's 137 Barclay Street in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. At WrestleJohn, you will see the crowning of the new citywide champion as the world-famous Cheeseburger takes on Weber Hatfield. Plus, see Speedball Mike Bailey take on Paul London. That one's going to be fast and high-flying. Plus, in trios action, the Colony takes on the Cyberhawks in a match that warms my heart. And also check out LJ Cleary taking on Bobby Orlando, goat in hand. It's going to be a good one. And if you can't get enough, please join us the very next night, again at Attic Brewing. That's 137 Barclay Street in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, because Thursday is Euphoria. At Euphoria, you will see Edith Surreal taking on Daniel McKay. Plus, 2 out of 3 falls. It is Bangin' Matthews versus Fresh Air. Plus, in triple threat action, we have Connor Claxon versus the smash hit Joel Bateman versus Tim Donst. And then make sure you stick around because it is Big Dan's 40th birthday party. Big Dan. It's going to be a fantastic time. If you want to join us for either or both events at Attic Brewing, be sure to check the links down below and get your tickets now. So one day when I was driving to work, I saw this billboard, and it said this quote from Walt Whitman that said, "Be curious, not judgmental." I like that. Because all those people that used to belittle me, they were never curious. Because if they were curious, they would say things like, "Hey Ted, do you like darts?" And I would have said, "Yeah, barbecue sauce." Ted Lasso might be my favorite show of all time. That isn't wrestling, branding. It might be my favorite show that isn't wrestling. And as I sit down right now to record the season 3 of Ted Lasso, the final season, just completed. And despite this fact, I find myself unable to press play. I haven't watched a single moment from season 3 of Ted Lasso. And I think that's because after that show is over, after I put the remote down one last time, I know that that's it. My favorite show will be gone. And yeah, I can rewatch it, but I'm never going to have that experience of sitting down excited to watch another episode of Ted Lasso. So I can't quite get myself to start season 3. So today on the Soapbox, I want to talk about endings. Because I think endings are very difficult. There are so many times where I sit down to watch something and I think to myself, this is great. If it can just stick the landing, this will be perfect. And then it just doesn't get there. And I think endings are especially difficult in professional wrestling. I mean, as Triple H said, the story goes on. You never finish the story. But we've had many different endings in professional wrestling. Companies end all the time. There is a final show, a final moment of a company. You know, before I started this channel, most of you who know me probably know that I used to work for a company called Chikara. And Chikara, I was always told when I was backstage that the final moment of Chikara was known. I was never informed of what it was going to be. But whatever that last moment, that final period at the end of Chikara, whatever that was going to be, had already been planned. And we knew what that was going to look like. And we were just always on the path to get there. Unfortunately, due to circumstances beyond my control, and that's all I'll get into here because that's not what this video is about, Chikara ended suddenly. So the end of Chikara ended at the end of the season that was brought to you through a show called Chikara Action Arcade, which you can still watch on Independent Wrestling, or IWTV. And what happened that season was Chikara faced a new threat in the Crucible. The Crucible looked at wrestling very different than Chikara. Chikara had this 20-year legacy at this point, and now the Crucible was there to kind of change everything, to warp the views on how preparing for a fight should be done. So the season finale that year was a Cybernetico under Crucible rules. And Chikara lost. It was an elimination match, Chikara on one side, the Crucible on the other. And Chikara was quickly picked off by the Crucible. Now, only one person could win the Cybernetico, and the Cybernetico was won by the Whisper, who is fantastic, and kind of turned his back on the beliefs of the Crucible by the end of that match. But he was a member of the Crucible. So the final moment, the period at the end of the sentence of Chikara, is the Whisper winning this not real victory for Chikara. A lot of question of like, Was what Chikara was doing working? Because they were so easily defeated. And while the Crucible now has this small damaged piece of armor in that the Whisper had turned the other way, they still won. And that's not the ending that was planned, for sure. So it got me thinking, what is a good ending? And one thing that I saw over and over again in my research is what the audience wants for a good ending is simply this. They want to know that the characters and people that they've invited into their homes every week are okay. That's what happens at the end of Parks and Recreation, where we see the flash forwards of everyone's life. That's what happens at the end of The Office when they go on tour and promote the documentary that finally comes out. We just want everyone to be okay. And that's not what Chikara left us with. So I decided I was going to go through a bunch of different wrestling promotions and see, could anyone ever stick the landing? So let's take a look at the endings of professional wrestling. Wrestling Society X. Wrestling Society X is a one-season wrestling show of 22-minute episodes that aired on MTV and MTV2. There's actually a really good podcast by the other brand of Plus Two Comedy did, on this entire season. So give that a listen if you want to learn the full story of Wrestling Society X. But how did it end? Well, in the final episode, fan favorite Chaos was fed to piranhas by the cartel.
Into that tank.
And fan favorites The Filth and the Fury were left laying by Team Dragon Gate, who then made the ring explode.
Guys, get out of the ring! No, get him out! Jesus, get him out! Oh, man!
So I don't know about you, but I don't feel like everyone was okay. I really don't think everyone that I care about is fine now. So I wouldn't say that this is the best ending. And of course, they didn't want this to be the ending. This was the season finale of Wrestling Society X. If you listen to the audio commentary on the DVD, and I highly recommend you buy the DVD, I've bought it twice because it's one of my favorite things in the world, you can learn a lot about what was being planned for Wrestling Society X and the philosophies and mindset of the creative of Wrestling Society X. And Season 2 of Wrestling Society X was going to end with a pay-per-view. They had plans in motion. They were going to bring in Terry Funk. It was going to be awesome. But instead, it ended with an explosion. Sort of. Despite the fact that this is the last episode of Wrestling Society X, it never aired. So it's not really the end of Wrestling Society X that most people got to see. Also, the way Wrestling Society X worked was there was an episode of Wrestling Society X that debuted on MTV. And then there was an episode of Wrestling Society Extra that aired online after the episode. So technically, the end of Wrestling Society X is a Wrestling Society Extra. Let's take a look at that.
Uh-oh, look at this. Body scissors, rolling him up. That's it. 1, 2, 3. He got it! Oh, no. What an upset.
He came up strong, kid. Yes. I was looking for hugs.
And DIFH will be competing for the Tag Team Championship here in Wrestling Society X. And guys, you got to admit, what an upset.
Again, not really an ending. They're promising tag titles that never came. Plus, everyone's favorite tag team is dead. They exploded. On top of that, that's also not really the ending. If you want the true ending of Wrestling Society X, the last piece of canon Wrestling Society X content is a special feature on the DVD where ring announcer Fabian Kalin cuts out his own tongue. So no, that's not how you end things. Everything is terrible in the world of Wrestling Society X. I guess the bunker exploded and burned down, and everyone will be missed. We'll never see any of those people again. It's a shame. We'll never see people like Matt Classic and Do It For Her. Those wrestlers just perished to never be seen again. I was going to say that was the worst wrestling ending I could ever imagine. But then I watched Lucha Underground. Okay, so we have a lot to go over here. First off, if you don't know, Lucha Underground was a wrestling promotion that took place over 4 seasons on the El Rey network. And this was my first time ever watching it. Was the final episode known as Ultima Lucha Cuatro, and I watched the whole thing, and let me tell you, this might be the best way to experience Lucha Underground, is going completely blind and just watch the ending, because it's madness. It is the closest you can come to watching Rick and Morty's interdimensional television, because it looks like you're looking into an alternate dimension. In this finale, Sami Callihan beat up a little person named El Bunny. Paul London was a wrestling mime. Matt Stryker was there. Karrion Kross was known as the White Rabbit and made someone bleed with the mandible claw. And Joey Ryan was replaced by Sammy Guevara for a match. All of that happens in the first match of this show. This is lunacy. And let me tell you, the ending, I just watched it again because it confused me. And I'm going to do my best right now to describe to you how Lucha Underground ended. I'm not going to look at notes. I don't have a script. This camera will not cut. This is how I think Lucha Underground ended. Okay. Pentagon, from the Lucha Bros, defended the Lucha Underground title successfully when he was then attacked by Vampiro and his master, who is a new character that we will never see again. That brought out Jack Swagger, who had the gift of the gods, who then cashed it in like it was Money in the Bank, and he became champion. We then cut backstage where Aerostar talks to Johnny Mundo, who's John Morrison or Johnny Impact or Johnny Elite or Johnny Blackcraft, whatever you want to call him, Johnny Nitro. And Johnny Nitro has a glove that makes you evil. It makes you powerful, but it makes you evil. And Aerostar is like, hey, you shouldn't have that glove. So he takes the glove off because it'll make him evil and gives it to Aerostar. Aerostar gives it to another guy, and that guy gives it to a woman, who then goes down a dark alley to find Jason X. With the Friday the 13th that was in space? Jason X is there, and this woman performs Kano's fatality from Mortal Kombat, where she rips into his chest and removes her heart. The heart of Jason X is now in her hand. She's like, okay, now I got revenge on the guy who killed my parents, and gives the glove back to this other guy who looks like Kick-Ass from the movie Kick-Ass. He's then attacked by Jack Swagger again, and Jack Swagger does the thing where he reloads his arms like that one Mission Impossible movie. So Jack Swagger then grabs Kick-Ass and like breaks his ankle, and then he takes the glove and starts doing the like we the people thing, and that spurts blood all over the place. We then cut to Johnny Mundo and Taya Valkyrie, his new wife, who they married on the show, to say like, hey baby, I'm a really good wrestler, you love me and stuff, right? No, Taya Valkyrie has been possessed by an evil doll, and the evil doll who is possessing Taya Valkyrie kills Johnny Mundo. We then cut to a limo that has Team Bad Guy in it, and it's a bunch of people. It's like an old man, and it's Jack Swagger, and the old man reveals that all of the gods are now in human form. And then it cuts to a man in shadows who's smoking a cigar, who then says, well, there's only one thing to do now, and that's take over the world. And he leans forward and says, prepare for bad news, and it's Wade Barrett! Wade Barrett is here! We then cut to Aerostar, because this isn't over yet, who gives some sort of magic pendant to a man in a casket who sits up and goes, what the f... And then it cuts and it says, to be continued. That is the ending to Lucha Underground in one take. It ends the same way as Alf. You guys remember Alf? Well, he's back in Lucha Underground ending form. Needless to say, not everyone's okay. A lot of people are dead, and the world is going to end because the gods are in human form. Not a good ending. Once again, this is not something that they had planned. They didn't know that Lucha... This bit's over. They didn't know that Lucha Underground was going to be canceled. So they were planning to do more. And the truth of the matter is, no one ever really knows when the company's going to end. I've been part of many different companies. DWF, Beast, Loco, Camp Leapfrog, all of these companies, Awesome, my first company, all of these companies are now gone, and none of them knew it was the last show when it was the last show. Most wrestling companies plan to go on forever. You never finish the story. So unfortunately, we very rarely get an ending. But we've gotten a couple. So let's take a look at the very few wrestling events where they knew it was the last show. 205 Live. 205 Live was a show to showcase the cruiserweights of the WWE after the great success that was the Cruiserweight Classic. It was a way for those who weighed a little bit less to show off their skills, and they were also given a small segment on every Monday Night Raw for quite some time. This was a way to introduce us to new stars like Ali and Drew Gulak and TJP. Also to give us some familiar faces like Brian Kendrick and Tajiri. Tajiri was there. Do you remember that? I think he had like 3 matches, but he was there. But this is where you would compete for the Cruiserweight Championship. And then they decided that this was not going to work out. And on February 11th, 2022, WWE decided it would air the final episode of 205 Live. But they knew this was going to be the final episode. So, how did they say goodbye to the purple brand? Well, they started off with a match between Trick Williams, who was brought to the ring along with Carmelo Hayes, against Iraman Jiro, the tag team partner of Kushida when they were Jacket Time. Remember Jacket Time? And they were talking about them on commentary, saying that they were the best tag teams on 205 Live. 205 Live did not have tag titles, just so you know. big victory for Trick Williams. And then we got a females match. We got Lash Legend versus Erica Yan. Again, there was no women's title in 205 Live. I mean, I guess they fit the weight limit, but there really wasn't anything to be won in 205 Live in the tag division or the women's division. So I don't know why they're being showcased here. You'd think it would all be about that Cruiserweight Championship, right? Well, the Cruiserweight Championship, which then became the NXT Cruiserweight Championship, was then combined with the North American Championship. By the time 205 Live aired, there was no Cruiserweight Championship. It had been dissolved. So there really was nothing for the Cruiserweights to do on 205 Live. There was no prize to chase. It was just a show that was really purple. And that was really shown in the final match. The final match showed Joe Gacy, along with Harlan. Remember Harlan come to the ring, and Joe Gacy talked about how he had redefined expectations and broke barriers by competing for the Cruiserweight Championship while being over 205 pounds, because that weight limit was exclusionary. Basically, Joe Gacy had declared war on the idea of a Cruiserweight Championship, because he would be left out of it because he could not qualify with it. And he had a match against Zion Quinn. And Zion Quinn was listed at exactly 205 pounds. I don't believe that. I'm pretty sure he was over 205 pounds. So the final match on 205 Live is a match between two people who are not 205 pounds. Joe Gacy also said that this was an opportunity now for every wrestler to level up, which is of course a title drop of the show that will replace 205 Live. And then, to say goodbye to the 205 Live brand, Joe Gacy wins. The final image of 205 Live is Joe Gacy having his hand raised in victory, having successfully destroyed the Cruiserweight division. There is no happy ending. There is no tomorrow. It is dead at the feet of Joe Gacy. You know, every time I bring up a show, I think I've peaked with what could possibly be the worst ending to a show. But once again, I'm pretty sure this is the worst. It knew it was the ending. It had a chance to really celebrate all the great moments that happened on 205 Live. And there was great. Remember Tony Nese has had a great run. There was some really good stuff with Drake Maverick as the GM. 205 Live, if you were a fan of that style of wrestling, you would get wrestling. You would get matches that would last 20-25 minutes. If that was your style, it was there for you. And it ended with the WWE telling you you were wrong for liking it. And that is your ending. Can we please find something that ended better? Saturday Morning Slam. Do you remember Saturday Morning Slam? It was a kid-friendly WWE show that aired as part of the Vortex block on the CW. It was fantastic. It started out kind of as just an information show. It was a way to kind of introduce kids to the world of the WWE, but it eventually turned into what I would believe to be its own brand. It had its own storylines that were more kid-friendly, and it even had its own GM in Mick Foley. Yeah, Mick Foley was running the asylum at Saturday Morning Slam. The best part of it, in my opinion, was the fact that you never knew who was sitting next to Josh Matthews each week on commentary. You had Dolph Ziggler, you had Alicia Fox, you even had the best version of Daniel Bryan. Not Bryan Danielson, not Wyatt family Danielson, not even Hell No Danielson. No, I'm talking about the Dazzler. The most dazzling man in all of professional wrestling who would wrestle bears. Do you remember that version of Daniel Bryan? Probably not, because you didn't watch Saturday Morning Slam. It was great. It was great entertainment. Now, unfortunately, Saturday Morning Slam only ran 2 seasons, and the final episode of Saturday Morning Slam had Alicia Fox on commentary and only featured 2 matches because it was a half hour of wrestling. And in this show, we saw the face-off between the Cobra and Mr. Sacco, which led to a match between Santino Marella and Jinder Mahal, which was what to be expected. A lot of comedy spots out of Jinder Mahal and Santino Marella, with Santino picking up the victory. But the big main event of this was a tag team match, as the primetime players making $1 million moves were set to take on the team of Sheamus and Randy Orton, 2 very big stars, very rarely seen on Saturday Morning Slam. One thing I want to point out is that their match runs 2 segments. They have to go to commercial, and Josh Matthews has to explain that during the break, Darren Young pushed Randy Orton into the ring post on the outside. But because it was blunt trauma to the head, they couldn't show it on something rated G on television. So in the instant replay, the moment he's about to hit the ring post, it cuts to a reaction of the commentators in the replay. Hilarious. It ends with a victory for Sheamus and Randy Orton as they stand tall over the dastardly primetime players. And that's kind of it. And what I find especially interesting about Saturday Morning Slam is anytime you watch some sort of WWE programming, they're constantly talking about other WWE programming. You're always getting the Raw Rebound and the Slam of the Week and all this information of what's going on elsewhere. There is no information here about what's going on other shows. It literally stands alone in its own universe. And at the time, it's airing on network television. So you don't need cable to watch the WWE at this time. You can watch Saturday Morning Slam on network television. So for a lot of kids, this is the only exposure to the WWE they're getting. And then it just ends one day. Not with any big moment and thank you to the crowd. It just stops. And there's no instructions or information on how to continue to be a wrestling fan. Just one day, if you didn't have cable, wrestling ended for you. And I find that to be pretty sad. And the reason it ended was this was a partnership with Sendai. This is the company that made like the Power Rangers. And they wanted more input on the brand and the content that was going out. And Vince McMahon absolutely refused to give the network say on what's going on their programming. I mean, they're basically a toy company that also makes television shows. What impact are they going to put on this show? I mean, they're going to try to kidify it, make it more kid-friendly. Before we know it, they were going to be adding, like, I don't know, vampires and zombies and Nacho Libre or whatever. You would never do that to a brand that you care about. ECW. ECW is a very interesting thing to look at because it has like 4 endings, maybe 5 if I miscounted. So let's talk about every time ECW ended. The first time you can say ECW ended would be when Eastern Championship Wrestling ended. And the moment that most people consider the birth of ECW is when Shane Douglas threw down the NWA Championship and rechristened it the ECW Championship, but not Eastern Championship Wrestling, Extreme Championship Wrestling. This is a moment that went down in history in the world of professional wrestling, and most people credit it as one of the greatest moments of ECW. And it is one of the greatest moments if you're a fan of Extreme Championship Wrestling. But a lot of people in that building that day had been following Eastern Championship Wrestling for quite some time. They were Eastern Championship Wrestling fans. And that day, they saw Eastern Championship Wrestling end. And it ended with a disrespectful man telling you that you're stupid if you like the NWA style, if you liked the style of what Eastern Championship Wrestling used to be, and get on board with this new cool thing, ECW, Extreme Championship Wrestling. I am a fan of the Extreme, so I'm not part of that group, but it's gotta feel bad, man, when you're being told that the thing you like is dumb. So then ECW Extreme Championship Wrestling was born and went on quite the run, creating fantastic stars like the Sandman, Sabu, RVD, bringing in legends like Bam Bam Bigelow and Terry Funk. But all good things must come to an end. They were able to successfully get on TNN, the Nashville network, for their programming Hardcore TV. It turns out this was just a test run for TNN to see if carrying wrestling was a good idea, so they took on ECW, buried them late at night, did not advertise them, and used that as a chip to steal Monday Night Raw from the USA Network. Paulie did not care for this and often called the station they were on a virus and a plague that was ruining the land of Extreme. And this, of course, led to the final episode of Hardcore TV, which is mostly just an advertisement for the pay-per-view. They had Guilty as Charged 2001 coming up, so they were advertising all the great matches they were going to have on that show. We had Tommy Dreamer versus C.W. Anderson, and no real idea that this was the last episode of Hardcore TV. So maybe we shouldn't count that. We'll just say the pay-per-view is the final episode. And we see a new champion with Steve Corino walking away with the ECW Championship, and Jerry Lynn and RVD putting on a classic to send home the fans happy. But no real hint that this was the end. Now, Paulie honestly believed that if they got onto a new network, ECW could continue. But without a network, they didn't have the exposure. They didn't have the money to pay people. And while there were 2 more ECW shows after the pay-per-view that did not air anywhere, they couldn't keep the train going. So ECW just kinda disappeared. They vanished one day, and eventually they showed up during the Invasion, but I wouldn't say that that's ECW coming back. That was the Alliance. But ECW does return. ECW comes back for one night. ECW's one night stand was a WWE pushed and promoted pay-per-view under the ECW banner. Paulie wanted to prove that ECW had value, and they said, just give us one pay-per-view, one more time to get everyone together and do things the Extreme way. They went into that pay-per-view without announcing really any matches. They just told everyone it was going to be an ECW reunion in the Hammerstein Ballroom, and everybody came. It is, in fact, one of my favorite pay-per-views of all time. It is great seeing all of my favorite extremists, as the WWE would call them, back under one roof again. Hearing Joey Styles once again on the call. Watching Paulie cut that famous promo, "This isn't Monday Night Raw, this isn't Tuesday Night SmackDown, this isn't even WCW, this is ECW." And the end of ECW One Night Stand is pretty close to perfect. See, the whole night, while ECW is doing their thing, the WWE boys are up in the balconies, drinking beers, and just crapping on the show. Just making fun of it, calling it a bingo hall. And then finally, it reaches a boiling point. The WWE superstars descend on the ECW wrestlers, and a brawl ensues, with the ECW originals getting rid of all of the WWE superstars and standing proudly in their ring. Sure, the Blue Meanie is bloodied by JBL, but they win this battle. And ECW stands the way that they should stand. United and defiant. They look out at those WWE superstars and they say, yeah, this is only for one night, but this is our ring. This is our brand of wrestling. And the one thing that may be true, that even though we might not be around anymore, we will never be you. That is the perfect send-off for ECW. So then they did ECW One Night Stand 2, and that was another great pay-per-view. That's where RVD wins the title with the help of Edge. And there's also that fantastic hardcore tag match with Edge teaming up with Mick Foley to take on Dreamer and Funk that gets way out of hand. Love that match. And then ECW comes back full time. And there's like zombies and vampires and dancers. It's basically a WWE version of ECW. And you know what? That's not nearly as good as standing defiant, giving WWE the finger and fading away. No, now we have this watered down, weird version of ECW. I mean, the Sandman's there, but he's not really wrestling. He's just kind of hurting people who wandered into the ring, like Nacho Libre. And Balls Mahoney's there, but he's in like a love angle with Kelly Kelly, with some guy named Mike Knox. This isn't ECW. And fans quickly turned on it, and ECW once again had to be canceled. The final episode of WWECW aired on Sci-Fi. Yeah, that's right, it aired on Sci-Fi. Don't ever forget that. This was a Sci-Fi Channel show. The final episode of ECW that aired on Sci-Fi is a ghost of ECW. It doesn't even resemble ECW. We started with a match between The Big Show and The Miz taking on Goldust and Yoshitatsu. ECW. Most of the show is actually taken up by a talk show segment. No, not by like Joe Gardner or Cyrus the Virus, but Abraham Washington. And all of the ECW wrestlers are there, like Shelton Benjamin and Vance Archer, who I like now, but not then. He wasn't an ECW guy then. Trent Beretta's there, being very frustrated with his role. But it's all leading to the main event. This is how we are going to say goodbye to ECW before it turns into game show NXT. and that's with an ECW championship match. The ECW champion, Christian, will take on Ezekiel Jackson. Now, I like Christian, I really do, but I wouldn't call him an ECW guy. This is a guy that in a couple months is going to win the world title by disqualification. This is not an ECW thing. But man, he sure tries. He cuts a promo about how important the ECW championship is, not just to him, but to the world of professional wrestling. And that he is going to defend this title in honor of all those guys that held this title before him. He's not going to name those guys because they don't work there anymore. So he can't bring up Dreamer or Sabu or RVD or the Sandman or Rhino or any of those important names in the history of ECW. He could just say, hey, this is for them. End of statement. And we have an Extreme Rules match. We are ending with an Extreme Rules. So at least we have our weapons and our tables and we're going to take things to the edge. And Christian loses to Ezekiel Jackson. Ezekiel Jackson is the final ECW champion. In the end, they tried to use the prestige of ECW to get heat for Ezekiel Jackson. Needless to say, this didn't work. And that is the official ending of ECW. If I could go back in time, I wish it all ended at one night stand. But no, that's how it ends. And that certainly is not how you end a wrestling show. That is not how you end a promotion. There's got to be one that did it right, right? WCW. It all came down to this one. I think we all knew that this is where this video was leading. Let's talk about the last episode of Monday Nitro. We open on Vince McMahon saying that he has bought his competition. He now owns WCW. I remember a very young Scott Holiday seeing this, running out of his room, finding his father, changing the channel, and screaming, "Something is happening!" Because my little mind was blown that WWE had purchased the WCW. We then get a very interesting speech from Ric Flair, Mr. WCW. I mean, maybe Sting is Mr. WCW, but Ric Flair is another one of the staples of WCW. And he came and spoke to us about what the future looked like and what WCW means. He says something that actually ages almost perfectly.
Someone very special to me said, do not go out of that show tonight knowing it's the last time that you'll ever be on TNT or TBS.
He also says something that ages horribly.
Have kissed the girls worldwide. Have made them cry.
The main point of the speech is to tell us not to be sad. We're not going to mourn WCW tonight. We're going to celebrate it. We are going to show what made World Championship Wrestling important to the world of pro wrestling. And I have to give them credit. That is exactly what they do. And you can tell that they're really spotlighting what made WCW special because they spend so much time on the cruiserweight division. We get a triangle tag match, that's another WCW original, the triangle tag match, where the Filthy Animals, Rey Mysterio and Billy Kidman take on the Young Dragons and 2 out of 3 count, one of my absolute favorite trios of all time. The winner of this match will get a title shot at the Cruiserweight Tag Team Championships later that night against Primetime and Kid Romeo, who are people I don't remember. And those titles were roughly new. They kind of had a big tournament for them and just crowned new tag team champions. But when the Filthy Animals win this match and move on and end up capturing those titles, Kidman and Mysterio make it seem like those titles are the most important titles in the world. Like it was something that they had been chasing for years, even though the titles had only existed for weeks at that point. We also get an interview with Diamond Dallas Page as he talks about the importance of WCW, how wonderful of a place it was that allowed him to grow and main event, and how guys like Lex Luger and Buff Bagwell helped build this company. Those are also two people we won't be seeing, oddly, but they're important to WCW. We also get Booker T capturing the United States Championship away from Scott Steiner, making him a double champion. And our main event is a classic WCW main event as, for one more time, the greatest rivals who ever lived, Ric Flair takes on Sting. It is a staple of WCW to have this match, and this whole show really is a showcase of what made WCW special. And throughout all of it, the looming guillotine that hangs over the neck of WCW is ever present, because throughout all of it, we cut to Vince McMahon talking about how these wrestlers aren't in the same class as WWE, and how soon they will all be without a job. So while we are celebrating WCW, the threat of the ending of WCW is something we are constantly reminded of. We end with a simulcast. What happens on Monday Night Raw is also airing on Nitro. What is happening on TNN is also happening on TNN, Turner Network Television. It cracks me up that Vince screwed up such an important line, and I will never miss an opportunity to bring that up. And Vince, in his arrogance, says that he will not actually be buying WCW. He is going to wait till Sunday and make Ted Turner go to WrestleMania and sign it over to him then. Yeah, this is the go-home Raw to WrestleMania. I forgot that. WrestleMania is this Sunday when WCW dies. And after he does that, he will then destroy his own flesh and blood as he defeats Shane McMahon. And then Shane McMahon's music plays, and Shane McMahon walks out on Nitro and announces that he has purchased WCW. And that's the ending. And a lot of people have an issue with this, that the end of WCW is used to promote a WrestleMania match between McMahon and McMahon. It honestly feels like it should be the worst ending imaginable. But it's not. A lot of people argue that Shane McMahon shouldn't be the final image of WCW. But think about what it represented. The idea that Vince McMahon didn't win. The end of WCW is a victory for WCW over Vince McMahon. WCW will not die. It will continue under the leadership of Shane. I know the invasion was bad, and we're not counting that right now. But for an ending, this is a great ending because it's not an ending. It's a glimmer of hope that these wrestlers that we've spent years watching every Monday night as we flipped back and forth between that and Raw will all have a purpose going forward. And it's the same purpose they've always had, to take down Vince McMahon and Monday Night Raw. Sure, Nitro may be gone, but the war continues. I honestly believe this is the best ending to a wrestling company you could possibly ask for. of course, there's a but. This isn't the end of WCW. WCW actually, just like Wrestling Society X, had one other show. In syndication, there was a show called WCW Worldwide. It was basically a recap talk show. WWE used to do a bunch of these. There was WWE Mania, there's WWE Livewire. There were these shows that aired in an earlier time slot, usually on the weekends, that would recap the events of Nitro, but cut out all the things that you couldn't air at that time slot so that kids could be involved and watch the show. So the final episode of WCW Worldwide aired on syndication after Nitro had aired, this final Nitro. And the weird thing about it, it was always a week behind. So it actually never addressed the events that took place on Nitro. Instead, it talked about the previous week's Nitro, which was completely irrelevant at this point. The end of this show, they do know it's the end, and they announce that this will be the final episode of WCW Worldwide, and that they'll see you at some point in the future. What's interesting about this is they actually filmed two different endings. They were always going to end WCW Worldwide that episode. But at the time, they didn't know that Vince McMahon was definitely going to buy the company. There was an alternate plan where WCW was going to go on hiatus. So there is an alternate take that we've never seen that is a different ending to Worldwide, which is them explaining that WCW will be gone, but will be returning in a few months with a new pay-per-view called WCW Big Bang. It was going to be like a reboot of WCW. So literally, WCW did not end with a bang, but with a whimper. It's kind of poetic when you think about it. So there you have it. That is how every company that I could find ended, and how difficult it is to end a wrestling company. And I think it comes down to this. The best way to end wrestling is to not end it. Wrestling is nonstop. There's always another match. There's always another challenger. There is always another fight. So how do you end something that's supposed to continue forever? No one's figured that out because no one's ever had to. If you have a successful company, you plan for the next show. You don't plan for an ending. You don't finish the story. But Cody still should have won at WrestleMania and taken the title. Thank you so much for watching. This episode took a long time. This one has actually been in development for quite some time, so I really hope you appreciated it. And of course, I know that there are hundreds of other companies that have ended, so if you know a company that has stuck the landing and ended well, please let me know in the comments down below. And I've been spending so much time on this video that I really don't know what to do next week. So if you have an idea for a video, also leave that in the comments down below. And while you're down there, be sure to subscribe and hit that bell so you'll get a notification next time I post a video. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope you have a great day.